Welcome to the Fiscal Philosophy YouTube channel. Now, I was not able to wake up early enough to live stream the PayPal earnings call. I did later in the day listen to it and looked over the earnings presentation. Overall, let's talk about what's going on here. So first, PayPal was on a bit of a win streak. There was a decent little run up in the price before earnings, and then as of the earnings, it dropped 8% and is back down into the low 70s. Now, if you remember, not all that long ago, maybe a year or so ago, the stock seemed to just languish kind of around the $60 level in that general area. Now, Alex Chris has taken over and he's doing his thing, and there's a little bit more optimism on it, but now it's seemingly kind of doing the same thing with this 70-ish dollar level, this maybe 71, 72, whatever. Every time it starts to kind of build some momentum, the market seems to just want to find all of the negative reasons to sell it off. Like any kind of increase in the price is just too good to be true. Everybody is still thinking, oh no, here's PayPal rug pulling us again. Because hey, everybody still, they look at the longer term chart and you can see that it fell from like $300 down to the 50s, right? That's pretty terrifying, that level of overhang, and people still have that perception of it. And of course, the growth numbers maybe aren't like absolutely out of this world amazing and high, but you take a look under the hood, you actually listen to the call, you look at the presentation, you look at the financials, and there's a lot to be positive about, in my opinion. On their key financial results, they had a year-over-year growth in total revenue of 5%. Now, this is not like a super, super high number, but last quarter, their revenue growth had decelerated to a quarter-over-quarter level of only about 1%. So this is actually sort of a slight re-acceleration in their revenue growth. So they had said that basically the deceleration in revenue growth was going to be due to a certain business segment, which I'll pull up next. But basically, I like the mid-single digits for total revenue growth for where they're at in their sort of transformation process that they've outlined. Now, we have some non-transaction related expenses that went up a couple percent. There were some different reasons behind that, which they shared on the call. Nothing too concerning with that, although it seems like maybe that's part of why the market's reacting the way it is. But what they're doing as far as all the initiatives they're pushing, all the different projects that they have running in tandem to sort of steer this ship into the future, I think that like a small increase in some of their non-transaction related expenses is kind of warranted. They're pushing out PayPal World, for example. That's huge. There's a lot of strategic marketing going on. They had, I think they mentioned that Will Ferrell was on board with their with an ad campaign they just put out in Germany not too long ago. Germany is a pretty big economy, so penetrating that market could be pretty valuable for them. So I'm not gonna make a big deal over something like that. Now, you have non-GAAP EPS year-over-year growth of 18%. That's pretty good. Now, granted, you should have a pretty good amount of growth there if there's any organic growth, because they are buying back shares left and right. But I do want to talk about their overall revenue growth and what's really one of the big drivers of that, which is their Braintree business. So let's go back to quarter one. Remember how their revenue growth overall on the whole company decelerated to 1% year over year in quarter one? That was a result of letting some Braintree revenue go. Now, why would they let revenue go? So people had pointed out, a lot of the PayPal naysayers out there. Hey, their margins are lower than they used to be. Why? Well, a lot of the Braintree revenue that they were bringing in, while the revenue growth was pretty healthy, the margins on a lot of that growth were not. So they were bringing in a lot of a good portion of it as what I would categorize as like low quality junk revenue. Revenue is beneficial to a business ultimately when it can be made to become accretive to the bottom line. If revenue you're bringing in has no realistic chance of reaching a point where it's accretive to the bottom line, then that revenue is really not worth anything to the business in the long run. And I think Alex Chris correctly recognized that flaw in how they were doing business. And, they made a tough decision to turn the ship, which means they're letting... Now, top line revenue growth is sexy, right? That's what you want to see. And that's what analysts like to see. It's what retail investors like to see. It looks good if you're doing 8, 9, 10% top line growth year in, year out. However, if that's never turning into more net income, more cash flow, then what really is that revenue doing for you? And so they made a decision that, hey, we're going to pump the brakes here. We're going to stop letting some of this lower quality revenue through the door, and we're going to let some of it go. We're going to just allow it to sashay away. Now, in quarter one, that caused a deceleration in the overall company's revenue growth to about 1% year over year because some of that revenue went away. Other segments had some growth, but overall, on balance, it ended up really, shrinking the overall big picture growth. Now, a lot of that impact was realized in quarter one from this strategy with Braintree. Quarter two, it looks like, according again to their infographic here, sort of more or less neutral on the Braintree, and then so they didn't actively necessarily lose Braintree revenue, which then made the year over year revenue growth go back to mid-single digits, so 5% this year, this quarter compared to prior year. Now, their estimate is that in Q3 and Q4, that there will be additional growth in Braintree. And my hope is that this growth is the higher quality, profitable, solid, better margin revenue than what they were taking in before, and will be accretive to the business. So we'll get back to hopefully, 7, 8, 9% year over year revenue growth, but then it'll actually start translating to bottom line growth, not just top line. I think that's the goal here. So hopefully that helps kind of explain that. Comment below if you got any kind of additional color or commentary to add on the Braintree part of things. Now on to maybe one of the things that people are looking at as a negative. Q3 guidance is maybe a little bit soft in that they're not really projecting any growth in the non-GAAP EPS. So their adjusting earnings per share isn't going to necessarily be any higher Q3 of this year compared to last year. And I mean, that's a negative. However, their full year guidance, they actually did move up pretty substantially to 11 to 14% adjusted EPS growth versus the guidance they had given earlier this year, which was between 6 and 10% adjusted EPS growth. So they raised full year guidance by a pretty healthy amount because they're so encouraged by what they've seen in recent months. Q3 guidance is kind of just, meh, middle of the road, maybe mediocre. It seems like a bit of a stretch for the stock to dump this much on not only a beat on their expectations this quarter, but also a raise on full year guidance. It is a little baffling, and it seems like they are hitting on a lot of the objectives that they've outlined for what they're doing with not only Braintree, but also Venmo and PayPal World. And on the call, it was interesting. No analysts asked any questions about Venmo, and they felt the need to say something at the end, like, "Hey, no questions on Venmo," even though we're like knocking it out of the park on Venmo. Usually, there's at least one question on Venmo, so that was kind of interesting. I do encourage you, like, if you're in this stock, to go ahead and listen to the call. I'm not alarmed by the sell-off. I'm just maybe baffled, if anything. It's crazy also, just how much they're doing in the background with stable coins. And not too long ago, there was like a big like movement, like I think Visa and MasterCard had a sell-off because people were worried about stable coins disrupting them. What's funny is PayPal also fell that day, and it's like, no, PayPal's doing all kinds of work with stable coins, and like they're like actually ahead of the curve on that. And it's just, people just, I think, don't realize it. Maybe people just don't like to read, don't like to listen, I don't know. But overall, I'm pretty satisfied with the results as far as what the business is doing. It's just, there just still seems to be like a disconnect, like with the price. Like maybe just the market just isn't buying it yet. Like they just aren't, they're not believers yet for some reason. There's something holding them back. But as they say, sometimes sentiment follows price, and this just hasn't had a big re-rate yet, so you're still not hearing a lot of positive news or noise on the stock. The buyback program remains robust. They're projecting $6 billion worth of shares repurchased in this year. Now, I personally am happy to see them have opportunities to buy back shares at lower prices. This will just add fuel to the fire once the market sort of starts to believe in the turnaround or reacceleration of the fundamentals, their earnings, their cash flow, if they should increase precipitously while the stock is still cheap and they're able to keep buying back. At a certain point, we will reap a magnified reward as shareholders for simply holding the stock. I like the buyback heavy strategy. If you look at a lot of the multi-baggers that have existed in the market over the years, in a lot of cases, buybacks have been a pretty big component in a lot of them. Now, granted, a buyback on its own doesn't mean a stock is going to be a multi-bagger. It's, did they buy back when the stock was cheap? Did they buy back heavy when the stock was cheap? Was the stock actually cheap, or was it, or was it deteriorating and actually shrinking, or was it still growing and maybe artificially cheap, and management bought back a ton of shares and then you got rewarded big time as a shareholder? What's the story here? I think it's more likely the case that things are going to plan, and that Alex, Chris, and management at PayPal they're competent, and that they have goals that they set out. They're executing on those goals, while at the same time, the stock price has not really gone up that much, and they're capitalizing on that opportunity to deploy a lot of that giant war chest they have just to repurchase shares. And the repurchases of shares really aren't getting in the way of their ability to hit their targets. It's a very cash-rich business. They're doing quite well. I'm excited to see what they do with PayPal World and Venmo and Braintree here in the next couple quarters, especially. So, all that being said, I'm satisfied with the results of the business. I think they have a pretty good strategy. And I'm not selling just because the market decided to have a little bit of a sell-off today. And I think that over the next few quarters, I'm going to do quite well on this investment. My cost basis isn't terribly high, so I'm not sitting here, holding some really bad bags or anything. Happy to let things play out as they will. I'm patient. I don't need it to 10x tomorrow. I just need management to keep executing and for the market to eventually figure it out. Thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen. Comment below if you have any additional thoughts. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. If you miss my regular uploads, like and comment. Consider becoming a member and join my Discord and yell at me to post more. All of that helps. It's good to feel wanted. It's good to be back. This is, of course, the second day in a row that you've seen an upload from your boy. So am I back? I hope so. I also do plan to stream the MPW earnings on Thursday morning. And I do have ideas of what stocks I want to do videos on in the near future. I am more or less inspired again and have some fresh perspectives and ideas. So that definitely helps. Take it easy, everyone. Have a wonderful day.